So, we talked in a previous segment about what happens if you've been nominated to the office of elder. And we talked about the training that's involved and how your wife is involved in that and how character issues are involved in that. And you may go through this arduous process of 12 months of training and exams and meeting with the session and going up in front of the congregation and get elected. And now, after 30 days' notice, you have been elected as an elder. What now?
Yeah, it's sort of like the dog that chases a car and finally catches it. What do I do?
What do I do with it? Yeah.
So that, because that would be a daunting thing, wouldn't it? Now you've got the real thing and a real job in front of you. Don't forget the primary thing. You're called as a pastor shepherd.
Of that congregation.
Of that congregation. That's right. And then by virtue of being in a Presbyterian system, we're connectional, so you will work through the regional church, the presbytery,
right,
but you're not the pastor of everybody there. And at the General Assembly level, the same thing. But your caregiving and caretaking will be there, but not at the same level. The primary focus is are the people in that local congregation to which God has called you. That's where your focus is. But please don't recognize that you should use your gifts in some fashion also in those other two courts, in the presbytery and the General Assembly.
Because there really are two types of errors. There are men who become elders and they use that as a platform to do other things, to write or to speak or to be at conferences or to get up in front of courts. And then there's the other error in which a man is an elder and he thinks, all I have to do is show up at church and be involved in my church. It doesn't matter what else is involved. And what you've essentially done is made yourself a Congregationalist. You're not Presbyterian, because to be Presbyterian is to be connectional. One of the things that I tell our congregation and especially our officers is we are the Presbyterian Church in America. And you contrast that with the Southern Baptist Convention. There is a natural connection amongst congregations in the PCA, and ministry goes beyond the local level.
That's right. So go to your question now, what do you do? Not only do you have that sense of your being an elder in the church, but they're the parts that are not only caregiving and shepherding, but there's also governing. Those really fit together, because the reference in 1 Timothy 3 says, if you can't manage your house well or manage your money well, then how can you manage the church? So there is management as well as caregiving. So it's a both and that we need to realize. And the reason I say that is there's been a movement afoot in these last few years to separate the management and the caregiving. And that's
even so far as to make a committee of elders the managers and another different committee of elders the shepherds.
Exactly. And that really does violence to the whole, because what are you managing? You're managing the people of God as you're providing care for them. So remember earlier segment we talked about the discipling ministry. Well, to do the discipling means that we are helping our people understand how to walk with the Lord, how to live righteously, how to use their time, how to budget their money. So we're concerned about those details, as well as what kinds of pain they're going through or what kinds of sins they're wrestling with, and so forth. And you just can't separate those tasks.
No, our elders need to understand that our government is not something that we sat down and said this would be the most efficient way to run an organization. This comes from biblical principles. And so if you are an elder, you are called to exercise the biblical task that Jesus has committed to you. That Jesus has said that I go to be at the right hand of the Father, but I'm not leaving you alone. I'm leaving you pastors, teachers, elders, and I'm giving you my Spirit to indwell you and them so that I will reign and rule through them. Jesus didn't abandon the church. He has chosen in His infinite wisdom that the church should be ruled by men chosen by the congregation, trained for the task, and committed or set aside, ordained, we can put it that way, for that purpose.
Exactly. In fact, both in the Scripture and picked up by our Book of Church Order is the concept of the plurality of elders. It's interesting that when Paul went on his first missionary journey, as he and Barnabas went from place to place, they came back and visited those churches, that they appointed elders in the church. In other words, you don't have a church without elders.
Right.
In other words, just the group of people together do not constitute church. You have to have elders.
Without elders, there is no church.
There is no church. And that's demonstrated again in Titus chapter 1, when Paul says to Titus in chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, the reason I left you in Crete is that you might set in order or complete the task that we had, and by appointing or ordaining elders in the church, and it's plural. So the plurality of elders is important. You don't have the church without that. The way I envision what Paul is saying in Titus is that they had gone through the island of Crete, conducted evangelistic campaigns in various towns, and people came to Christ. And now he says, I've got to go on another errand, another mission. So Titus, I'm leaving you here, but I'm going to write you a pastor's manual. And in that pastor's manual, I'm going to give you direction. And so the reason I left you here, and is he writing at the very beginning of that pastor's manual, Titus, the epistle of Titus, is that you ordained. The very first thing, he doesn't say to hold more campaigns. He doesn't say to go minister to the sick. He says that you ordain elders. Why? Because we need to get a formal identification of the church. How do you do that? They're elders that are there.
That's right. And so we have to understand that as elders, our primary calling is in the congregation. And that is going to require the patience, the perseverance, and the work that the Lord calls us to. A wonderful way to look at this is if you read Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, that's not really just about ministers of the gospel. It's really about leaders in the church. And if we think we have problems in the local church or in the PCA, I've often said that the leaders in Corinth wish they had our problems because they're a lot less than they had. And that was a church founded by the Apostle Paul. And so Paul encourages the leaders in the church to persevere with the congregation, to help the congregation to grow, and to shepherd them along. And so that's what our calling should be as elders. We should be aware of the needs of our congregation. They're not there to serve us. We're there to serve them.
Right. In fact, okay, now take it so that we have those passages, Corinthians, Timothy, Acts 13, Titus 1. You also have chapter 8 of the book of Church Order, which talks about the office of elder. And you go through there and you'll find that it makes general statements about the office of elder, and then it separates out the distinction between teaching elders and ruling elders, but they're all elders.
Right.
Okay? It's just that now they have different tasks in terms of responsibility, taken basically from 1 Timothy chapter 5, that the elders who are worthy, who are teaching, are worthy of double honor. So there's some distinction within the eldership, but they're all elders. Okay? So chapter 8 gives the responsibility to the plurality of elders. The other thing the PCA has done is operated on what is known as the parity of elders. That is, that they're the same, and so that is, especially in our higher courts and presbyteries and General Assembly, that we want committees and commissions to have a balance between teaching and ruling elders, because we hold they're all elders.
So there may be different tasks that they may do.
Yes.
But their authority is not different.
It's all the same.
That's right.
Exactly the same. So, and then when you go to chapter 11 of the book of Church Order, there it talks about the session, that each court of the church, so session, presbytery, General Assembly, each of them is qualified as a legitimate court of the church to render decisions of life and doctrine. So we don't always have to send overtures to the General Assembly. We can have study committees at the session level, and we can make pronouncements that are based on the Scripture, just like a General Assembly might. The benefit of a General Assembly is that it is for the wider church and beneficial.
And what's significant about this is an elder's primary calling is to his local congregation. That's where he spends his time. But an elder is not living up to the calling of elder if he's not involved in the higher courts.
Right.
If he is not involved in the work of Presbytery and General Assembly, is not letting the local congregation know what's going on at Presbytery and at General Assembly. And that calling is to eldering in the church.
Now, what is the problem? And the PCA experiences it. There's almost a default setting to the teaching elder. And as a result, when we talk about the churches, that's Pastor so-and-so's church. It's not the elders' church. You know, when we're trying to, we know it's ultimately Christ's church, right. But in terms of just our identification as we're driving down the street. So, but it isn't the pastor's church. Our tendency is to say, well, he's the professional, he's the one we're paying, so we're going to default to him to give leadership in the life of the church. Well, maybe you have that primary among equals for purposes of giving leadership, and that's okay, but it's never just one person making decisions. So you as a pastor of the church and I as a pastor of a church, as teaching elders, cannot act for, vote for, mandate anything by ourselves and say the session said. We can't do it. It's a corporate task that has to be done.
And I think what's important here is that ruling elders being involved in Presbyterian General Assembly is not in competition with their teaching elders. One of the greatest ways to support your pastor is to be there with him, helping in the work. You know, I love that picture from the Old Testament of Aaron and Hur holding up Moses' hands. And when Moses' hands were upheld, Israel was victorious. But then Moses got tired. You know, we all get tired. And so we need others to hold up our hands. And so I personally encourage my elders not just to go to Presbytery, but to work on Presbytery committees, to be involved on Presbytery commissions, to get to know other members, elders at other churches and other pastors of other churches, to build up that connectionalism. And then one of the greatest problems, I think, for a teaching elder is not helping his ruling elders be connected in the higher courts.
Yeah.
And so if you're a teaching elder and you go to General Assembly, one of your tasks is to keep your ruling elders involved, to introduce them to other people, to tell them the committees they can work on, to explain what is going on if maybe this is the first or second time at General Assembly. It doesn't help your elders and it doesn't help your church if you're ignoring them. This is, to use a current phrase, a band of brothers, that we're together in this fight for the Lord. And so we work together. You cannot ignore the higher courts.
Yeah, but the problem, like I said, is part of it is that we, maybe inadvertently, maybe it's part of the way the culture is, we communicate that without the teaching elder doing it, it's not going to get done. And that's unfortunate.
Or that it's not important.
It's not important, that's right. So I'm thinking that what happens then, if that goes on, is I don't know what Diotrephes' position in the church was, but in 3 John 9, he's referred to as someone who is in charge to the point that he runs the church, he has kept the elders at bay, he won't let people read letters that have come, and even the elders. So poor John, who was an apostle, was restricted by Diotrephes of doing anything in that church, wherever that church was. And so he was a strong-willed solo leader. And that, John puts it in there as a black eye, as a mistake. That is wrong. And to have that kind of leader, plus the fact he was abusive, that doesn't make it, but that's what tends to happen.
That's why we had that principle, those two principles you talked about earlier, of the plurality of elders and the parity of elders.
Yes.
Because this is not to be a one-man show. It doesn't matter whether the one man is the pastor or an elder or the richest man in the church. It's not to be a one-man show.
Exactly. So where the training should have, and the BCO should have happened during training and then needs to apply is BCO 12, which talks about the session. What are the duties of the session? How is it made up? But there's one thing that always amazes me when I read it again, and it's BCO -5, and it says the powers of the session are, and it's talking about the plurality now, and then it lists from A to H you know, an exhaustive list. It's not totally exhaustive, but
pretty comprehensive.
It is very comprehensive. That's a better word. I mean, it covers from soup to nuts about everything that is done in the life of the church. So from the point of view of oversight of the visible church, Christ is the head of the visible church and the invisible church, but in terms of that local assembly of God's people, that these men are going to be held account for these things, and that is a joint effort, not just one person. It's the session has power, not the pastor.
And often a sign of dysfunction is in which the session, the elders, abdicates their duty over worship and Christian education and missions and all of those things you're listing in 12:5. And the only thing they think they're in charge of is the pastor, which is not the case, because the pastor's not a member of the congregation. He's a member of the presbytery and is under the authority of the presbytery. And what that really is, it's an abdication of duties. It's we don't want to be bothered with that comprehensive list. And so we're going to delegate that over to the pastor, and if we don't like the way the pastor does it, then we're going to hold him accountable.
Exactly, make life difficult for him.
When really, in reality, elders should be involved in those duties listed in 12-5.
Now listen to what we're saying. What we're saying is we're affirming in the highest order we can, with the largest words we can come up with, the absolute necessity of ruling elders in the life of a church, and the plurality and parity of the eldership. That is absolutely critical and central to the flow of the local church as the PCA Book of Church Order is constructed. I can't think of anything more affirming than that.
No, I mean, as you said, what makes a church is its elders. Yeah. And our book describes this, because when you want to form a new church, yes, when you are planting a church, and you want to use Book of Church Order language, particularize, become your own congregation. The requirement is not that you have so much money in the bank. The requirement is not that you have so many people attending. The requirement is not that you have so many Christian education classes. There's only one requirement, Dominic.
I know.
And that's that you have elders.
At least two.
And if you don't have two elders, it doesn't matter if you have $10 million in the bank. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you have 20 Christian education classes. It doesn't matter what kind of ministries you're involved with. You are not a church.
That's right.
So they are essential to the formulation of a church. And that's not just something that's for efficiency's sake. That's how Jesus has defined the church.
Exactly. And that will protect the church in so many ways. And it will also probably reduce the number of battles that ruling elders have, because they think their only job is to keep right herd on the pastor, the teaching elder. And that will restrict them, because now they will be so involved in meaningful activity that they won't have time to ride herd, because they don't need to, because everything else is running as it should in the life of the church. And so that's a beautiful system if we won't break it up, if we won't distort it by seeing, cheapening what should not, which the Scripture gives as a high value.
And I think ruling elders need to consider their participation in the same way that they think about the local congregation. So as an elder, what would you think about a member of your church that was lackadaisical in worship, wasn't involved in doing any teaching, didn't involve in ushering or greeting or working in the nursery, wasn't involved in any kind of ministry, and all they did was complain about the church? And what we should be doing more of this, or we should be doing more of that. If you're an elder and you think the PCA should be more involved in missions, and you're not involved at the presbytery and general assembly level, you got to stop complaining. If you think we need to be more focused in this area of our theology, and you're not involved, you need to stop complaining. You're no better than that member who thinks that just by complaining, you could order other people around. As an elder, part of your ordination vow is to be participating in the wider church.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the pattern that we're coming out here with is how important it is in the life of the church that both the ruling and teaching elder take their position seriously. They see it as a calling from Christ, and they see they care for the church both in terms of the comfort and the shepherding they do, as well as the management of the life of the church. I think it's absolutely critical, and that's not a solo job.
No, it isn't.